Hey, everybody. Oh, they talk to me. This is good. Yeah. So, how many of you have ever been summoned for jury duty? Oh, one or two, right? Like almost every hand goes up. I'm just thinking back a few years ago, one of the times I was summoned for jury duty, I got up and I showed up. And this will all sound familiar to you because, once you arrive and you check in, there's really not much to do but sit and wait. And so everybody was sitting like near the back, and I thought, I don't want to be like all closed in. So I'm going to go up to the front, and I'm going to look, there's all this room. There is an empty seat here, and there is an empty seat here. This must be the perfect spot. And so I sit down, and I just begin to think, since there's nothing else to do. And I'm thinking about lots of things, and all of a sudden, does this ever happen to you? You're thinking, but your brain decides it has something it wants to think about? You didn't choose it? Yeah, so I find that I'm thinking about the fact that I am sitting in a room and I have been summoned for a jury, and the question came to my brain, through my brain, wow, what if you were being summoned for the jury of the young man who last night went into a church in Charleston, South Carolina, and shot 9 people? Now, I didn't want to think about that. I didn't choose to think about that, but my brain went there. And so I heard my brain asking me a lot of questions, like, wow, Tracy, if you had been selected for a jury for the young white man who went into a church and shot 9 black people because of the color of their skin and for no other reason, could you serve on his jury and be fair and impartial? And I took a deep breath, and I relaxed into that, and I said yes. It would not be my first choice, but yes. And then my brain continued to ask questions. Well, what if that had been a young black man, and he went into a white church and he shot 9 people at the end of a prayer study? Do you think you could be on his jury and be fair and impartial? And I said yes. And my brain filled in the rest of the sentence. Yes, but do you really think he would even get to trial? It's like, whoa. Took another breath and tried to just breathe. Now, this will sound familiar to you because I'm sure many of you have been in those situations where your brain is thinking of all kinds of things and you're like, I know science of mind. I got spiritual practice. I'm just going to meditate, clear my mind. Well, I thought that, but it didn't work. So my brain then kept asking me questions, different combinations. Well, what do you think if last night had been someone who practices Islam and they went into a church and they killed someone, do you think they would get to trial? Do you think they would have a fair trial? Could you serve on the jury? What if it was someone who was a young woman and she went into a church of a different race or ethnicity or a religious practice? And so my brain just kept asking me these questions. You get the idea? And like every time I'm having to answer the question, like, okay, yes, I think that would get to trial, or I think I could serve on the jury. And all of a sudden, like my brain is so busy, and I am just going with the flow of that, and I feel someone grab my arm. Now remember, the requisite empty seat on my right, the requisite empty seat on my left, and I feel someone grab my arm. So it pulls me out of it, and I look, and I see that this man is looking at me with this very concerned look, which confuses me, because I'm like, why is he concerned, and why is he touching me? And he looks at me with this deep concern, and he says, are you okay? Which I'm like, yeah, what business of it is yours? I mean, my brain is reacting. It's like, are you okay? Is there anything I can do? And at the moment, as I'm confused about why he's touching me, why he's asking me these questions, I realize that there are tears streaming down my face. And it all comes together just like this. And I turned to him, and I don't know where the answer came from, except deep, 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 deep down inside of me. Spirit, knowing the answer to his question, is there anything he can do? The answer is, well, actually, yes. As a white man, it would be great if you would tell everyone you know, every chance you get, that it is not okay with you, that black people are being killed in this country for no reason other than the color of their skin. And he looked back at me and he said, I can do that. I will do that. And in that moment, what I realize now is that I was calling him to heart-centered social engagement. That I was calling him to be the example of love and truth and unity and harmony and wholeness in the world. That without knowing it, there was something that came together in that moment in me and through me and as me to be able to engage with him in a way to come out of myself and not inspire him, but simply to request from him that he would take some action. An easy action, maybe, but I don't know who his friends and his family and his co-workers are. It might be something that would be very difficult for him to have those conversations or to make that statement and to take that stand. But if he did what he said he would do, that was an example, a very powerful example of social engagement. So often when we hear the term social engagement or social action, we immediately go to activism. We immediately go to protest. We immediately go to political action. We immediately go to it must be like angry. You got to be angry to get engaged. And those are all good actions to take. But what I believe is that true social action begins with a seed that is not necessarily coming from anger. It's not coming from shame or blame. It's coming from a place of deep, deep love for humanity. That social engagement is coming from this place of I choose to live my daily life in a way that expresses and is an example of spirit in action. When we commit to social engagement, being engaged, we step outside of ourselves as individuals and intentionally gift some part of ourselves to creating a better world. Social engagement is the spirit of namaste put into action or expression vocally or in some way. If you are familiar with scripture, social engagement is living the scripture that says, when you see me, you see the Father. Social engagement is living your life, your daily life, your everyday life in a way that represents or models spirit in action. And that is not always easy, but when you're clear that's what you're doing, it becomes easy to do. In Stained Glass Spirit, becoming a spiritual community where oneness does not require sameness, there's a section that is titled Inclusion Requires Action. And one of the quotations at the beginning of this section reads like this: To be an upstander, you must wake up, suit up, show up, and speak up. Be an example of what it means to raise the vibration and lift up humanity. Repeating, to be an upstander, you must wake up, suit up, show up, and speak up. Be an example of what it means to raise the vibration and lift up humanity. So there's no surprise in this entire month that has been focused on empowerment. And today, thinking about heart-centered social engagement, being engaged, motivated by and from the heart to create a better world, then it's easy to remember that it requires action. Ernest Holmes in Can We Talk to God says, the greatest good which our mind is able to conceive should be affirmed as a part of our everyday experience. We should venture forth into a life of action with the will to do, the determination to be, and joy in becoming. So even Ernest Holmes reminds us and challenges us to, yes, do our spiritual practice. Yes, understand and study spiritual principle, and to take action. There's no surprise that many of you have heard the phrase that we all use to remind ourselves of this, that spiritual mind treatment is great and important and powerful. But we must treat and move our feet. See, yeah, I knew you knew it, right? Another example in my life of a time when I was able to actually evidence this was a couple decades ago. I mean, it happens all the time every week. But lately, this example I've been reminded of this example because of things that have been happening. So I live in Dallas, Texas. And a couple decades ago, I was working with a client and in a large corporation, and she pulled me aside and she said, "Hey, Tracy," the conversation went something like this. Began innocently enough. Yeah. "Hey, Tracy, would you be interested in helping plan a weekend conference on leadership?" Am I getting paid for this? Well, no, in the community. Like, would you be willing to be a part of this planning team? We want to start this new conference on leadership in the community and help build more leaders from the community to be able to get involved in city and in their jobs and all of that. And because leadership, team building, and customer service were three of the things that I really focused on at the time, then I said, well, yeah, that'll be great. And I'm happy to do that. And as I was getting ready to walk away, she said, "Oh, by the way," yeah, take a breath, it's coming, something's coming. "Oh, by the way, this conference is for the LGBT community." And she paused, and then she very tentatively leaned forward a little bit and said, "Are you still willing to do it?" Now, here's some of the backstory. So I'd been working with this client for a while and doing team building and diversity and inclusion training for them. And she knew that I was cisgender, that I was heterosexual, and she knew that about me because we had been working together for a while and it had come up in some of the conversations. And so I was surprised that she thought I might say no, because she knew my background and she knew I'm all about leadership and leadership development. And so, of course, I said, of course I'm still in. Yeah, no problem. No issue in that moment. However, my brain, my brain was like, once I said yes and we got the first meeting scheduled and I'm getting ready and I've learned more about what's going to be expected of me. And my brain starts asking those questions, like those ego questions, like, what do I really have to offer? I mean, I'm not a part of this identity group. I'm not going to fit in. I don't know. Maybe I should have said no. Maybe I should have left that slot for somebody else who is a part of that group. Like, am I taking up space that really doesn't belong to me? And wow, is leadership the same? Is it going to be different? My brain asks me, you got that email and it says you've got to, as a member of the planning team, you must help raise money to fund the conference. I'm like, yeah, I know I've been on 12 boards of directors and I've raised money before, but I don't know, can I really raise money? Right, this is the brain, the craziness of the brain. And then the brain got to what I think was its real question. If you have to raise money and you start calling people to ask them if they will sponsor, are your clients going to think you're a lesbian? And it's so funny because when my brain asks those ego kind of questions, right, then I entertain my brain and I start answering the questions. Like, it is a nonsensical question from a conscious level, but because my brain is asking it, I start having this conversation back and forth. So on that last question, well, what if my clients think I'm a lesbian? And my consciousness is like, yeah, so what? What did they do? That's not anything wrong with that, right? So I'm having this conversation with myself. Have any of you ever done that? Right? There's nobody else in the room. It's just you and your ego, your higher self and your ego. And, even my consciousness was like, okay, we've got to stop this. Brain, so if someone who is a client of yours thinks that you're a lesbian and they decide they don't want to do business with you anymore, then you don't really want to do business with them anyway, do you? So my consciousness, then elevated me from the ego questions to the authenticity questions. Questions like, am I willing to walk my talk? Am I really willing to walk my talk, show up in the way that I ask other people to show up? Am I willing to be an example of that? My authenticity question of, am I willing to be in the minority as I'm working in this project? Now, in case you hadn't noticed, I'm an African-American woman, my skin is brown, and 95% of the time, especially in my work, I am a minority based on race and ethnicity. This is like not new. But in this case, being a minority of a part of a group that I am not normally, at that point, was not normally engaged with, it was like the authenticity question. Are you willing to show up and operate in a place where the norms are not necessarily what you're used to? You don't already know everything and how it's going to work, and you don't know what people are going to say or what they expect. Are you willing? And of course, my conscious answer was yes. And for me, one of the most powerful authenticity questions, and it did come up in this instance, Tracy, are you willing to be an example of love and respect? Yes. So that means I must behave in a different way. I must do something different. I must show up and speak up and suit up. That's what it means. That's what it means to commit to social engagement in an effort to contribute to a world that works for everyone. And from that conference, there were a lot of positive outcomes that surprised me when I think back. It was the first Leadership Lambda conference in the state of Texas. It was followed by a 9-month leadership program. So people who came to the conference and wanted more, we created a 9-month leadership series that they could participate in. We had great outcomes because many people who participated in that first conference, we tracked them and we learned that they were having promotions. They were earning promotions in their jobs. They were being seen as leaders and being invited to serve on boards of directors of all kinds of organizations in Dallas-Fort Worth. And within 3 years of that conference, there were people who had been at the initial conference and the second year conference who were now running for office, and some people were actually being elected in local positions. It was a very, very powerful demonstration. And people who attended those first couple of years created coalitions that resulted in intentional inclusion of people from the LGBTQIA community who had not been invited or included before in all kinds of organizations. And 15 years later, that conference annually was still happening and having more and more and more visible success. Social engagement does not always come from anger. Social engagement does not always come from fear. Social engagement comes from the seed of love. And if there are things that you love and people you care about, then you have no excuse for avoiding social engagement. And I don't know what your heart-centered social engagement might look like. I don't know. I can't, if I visited with you one-on-one, I could probably help you figure out what your place to be and what is yours to do. All I know is that there is something or there is someone or there is some identity that you love so much that you have something to do or say or give or teach that engages you in creating a better world. You have something that will engage you from your heart in such a way that you can show up as the hands and the heart and the voice of God. And if you don't, I'm worried about you. But if you need some ideas because you're not clear, then I would direct you to the Centers for Spiritual Living Global Vision. The Global Vision has 15 statements of what we envision for a world that really represents heaven on earth. And there will be something in there working for changing or eliminating homelessness or poverty or illness, creating an environment where no child is hungry, create an environment where people are judged based on their character and not the color of their skin, being engaged in a way that makes a positive difference in the world. And the Global Vision is a place, a guide, ending with our vision statement that we believe that we can create a world that works for everyone. All right, now let me just make a little brief comment about that. Sometimes people hear that phrase, a world that works for everyone, and they're like, well, that'll never work. We can't make up different rules for every individual person on the world, and every individual person gets their way about everything they want to do. That's not what it means. Take a breath. It means that we create systems and policies and practices that people have identified that allow them to live a life that they love as identity groups, as collectives. That not just individually I can create a life I love, but collectively there is a process, there is a way to ensure that the basic needs of all people are met, that we have enough resources in order to be able to do that. So a world that works for everyone takes into consideration that in different cultural groups in different regions of the world, the details might be different. but that wherever people are living, they are able to see the truth of life being revealed for them, being available to them. And that's what we mean when we say contribute to a world that works for everyone. So there has to be something that you can do if you're not already doing it. There must be. And so whatever you do, I invite you and maybe even challenge you to do it from love. I challenge you to do it in love and to do it as love. If you are really clear that that is your motivation, to be the example of love, to give in love, to represent love, then it can only move you individually forward and forward the collective. I've been thinking a lot about this lately, and I've started writing this piece, and it's not quite finished yet, but it's at that point where I want to share it with you because it reminds me to be conscious about why I am stepping into social engagement. And I hope that it will also help you be intentional as you step into social engagement. Are you against racism, or are you for respect? Are you against hatred, or are you for heaven on earth? Are you against politicians, or are you for democracy? Are you fighting a nagging problem, or are you forming a new pattern? Are you blaming the poor, or are you building a bigger pool? Are you against injustice, or are you for inclusion? Is your attention on destroying lack, or is your attention on demonstrating love? Are you complaining, or are you creating? Are you trying to fix a broken world, or are you trying to demonstrate the world Spirit has already created? Heart-centered social action is about living love. Heart-centered social action is about moving from namaste to Ubuntu. Now, my guess is many of you know namaste. That namaste, we can recognize someone, and we are recognizing the God in me is the same God in you. That the beloved in me is the beloved that is the same source of your life. And that's beautiful. Don't change that. Namaste, however, does still see us as two separate beings. So I also like to, at times, intentionally choose to move from namaste to Ubuntu. Now, say that after me, Ubuntu. Ubuntu. One more time, Ubuntu. Yeah, U-B-U-N-T-U. And some of you are familiar with Ubuntu. It is a South African philosophy that basically, loosely translated, means I only exist because of you. I cannot exist without you, and you cannot exist without me. That our lives are so integrally combined, that we are so interdependent, that whatever you do has an effect on me and vice versa. And so, as we think about social engagement, I invite you to think about moving from namaste to Ubuntu as you choose what to do. And it has a different feel to it. So if you are able to easily do so, I invite you to stand up. And simply look at someone close to you, next to you, behind you, across the aisle, and bow to them and say quietly, Namaste. And then I invite you to make eye contact, breathe together with that person or a different person. And as you breathe together and make eye contact, and if you're comfortable, hug, but it's not required, and whisper, Ubuntu. My words to you are namaste. I see the perfection in you. I know that love is seeking to express in, as, and through you, and that is the truth for you as it is for me. And I also honor you with Ubuntu because I could not be here today. I could not be speaking. I could not be living a life of social engagement if you too were not doing your best to be love in the world. Please join me in prayer. As I breathe that breath and I exhale everything that has happened before this very moment, what I know is absolutely true is I quiet my mind, I still my body, I relax into what is, in one sense, silence, only to realize that life is happening and it needs no help from me. That there is a power and there is a presence that is always creating and expressing and expanding life, and has created and is expressing and expanding life in this very breath. Not only for every person within the sound of my voice, but for every form of life, every blade of grass, every flower, every tree, every star in the sky, the sun as it rises and sets, every planet, all of life. There is no exception. And because there is no exception that this all is happening, what I know is absolutely true is when I stand in the place of namaste, I see the beauty and the intentional diversity that has been created by this source of life, and I honor it. And when I breathe into and choose to live from a place of Ubuntu, I not only honor it, but I accept it and surrender to it as one whole life, not separate, no separation. And so I claim and declare in this very moment that the truth of life in all of its diversity comes together in inclusion and oneness and wholeness in a state of Ubuntu, and that both are perfect and complete. And I'm so grateful that now is the time to choose to be engaged in social engagement. Now is the time to choose to be an example of love in the world. Now is the time. And for that opportunity to be the expression of love, I simply am grateful. So if you, like me, are willing to allow yourself to be carried away and surrender to the flow of divine activity, knowing this intention has been set and it must be made manifest, then I invite you to repeat after me. Aho. Ashe. Amen. Amin. Shalom. And so it is.